Housing for the cities in the San Mateo County region, which is just directly south of San Francisco, and it's within that market area. We're also working on a study in the Houston, Galveston metro area, and have completed studies, AFH studies in North Las Vegas and Santa Fe. We are on the technical assistance team that HUD has put together to teach jurisdictions how to conduct an assessment of fair housing. And our areas of expertise are in the data analysis and mapping, the community engagement, and helping communities set goals. So the participating jurisdictions in the Denver-Aurora-Boulder County Assessment of Fair Housing are shown on the slide here. So it's City and County of Denver, Denver Housing Authority, City of Aurora, Aurora Housing Authority, or it wasn't like blocking some of you over there, City of Boulder, Boulder Housing Partners, Boulder County Housing, City and County of Broomfield, City of Longmont Housing Authority. So all of these organizations are submitting one assessment of fair housing, okay, and are partnered there. But we look at the region as a whole for the analysis, as well as deep dives on the individual participating jurisdictions. So I think we all know that housing issues, housing discrimination doesn't stop at a city or county boundary. You know, we really do operate on a regional level. So to get us started, we want to find out a little bit about you all. And so I'd like you to go around the room and have you say your name, the organization or the group that you represent, and in one sentence, what led you to public service. And Ms. Haynes, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I am with the Colorado Black Leadership Caucus. Living is what led me to public service.
Thank you.
Vanessa Quintana with the City of Aurora. What led me to public service is just simply being first generation high school and college graduate, having been raised in generational poverty. It is my duty to work towards breaking the cycle of poverty.
My name is Christy Schaefer. I'm a social worker at the Denver Public Library. Oh my, I don't know. Feeling kind of like an outcast in high school, and then starting to work with people experiencing homelessness and finding my calling there.
My name is Kelly Mueller. I'm with the Department of Corrections Parole, and I also don't know what I need to work in public service. I guess just wanting to help people and wanting to work with hard to work populations.
My name is Sue Reardon. My organization is Colorado Criminal Roundtable Network. We work with refugees from Burma in the Denver-Aurora area and compassion for others.
Hi, my name is Karen Strand. I'm from CWE, the Center for Work, Education, and Employment. And I think what led me to public service was just a long history of family members who were police officers and firefighters.
I'm Trish Bailey. I'm with Aurora Public Schools. I'm one of the McKinney Vento advocates. And what led me to work in public school is I'm fourth generation public school worker. So family lineage.
Hi, I'm Ann Tobin, City of Denver, work in the Office of Economic Development, and I work with applicants looking to purchase affordable housing.
Jeremy Brown, City of Denver, got a public service for physical housing income tax credits.
Hi, I'm Derek Woodbury with the City of Denver, Office of Economic Development, and went into public service to make the city better place.
I'm Adrienne Topolowski, and I am the Ministry Director at a local pallet company. We employ about 80% of our employees are refugees from Burma, and so it's my job to come alongside our employees and support them and their families.
My name is Margie Cannon. I'm the Neighborhood Liaison Coordinator with City of Aurora, and I enjoy public service because we enjoy in this country an opportunity to participate on so many different levels. Not that many people do participate, but it's exciting to me when people do, and I love having a job, helping people, providing them with resources to do that. Thanks.
My name is Meg Allen. I'm in the Neighborhood Liaison for Immigrant and Refugee Communities with the City of Aurora.
and I have always been in public service, starting from like a young high school age, I would say. And I really enjoy system change, getting into mainstream systems and busting them up a little bit to make them more accessible.
Hi, my name is Alex Dino. I'm a land use attorney at Ott & Johnson. I'm not in public service, but a lot of our attorneys and clients are interested in what this rule is and how it's going to play out, so I'm here to take notes on behalf of everybody.
My name is Courtney Phillips. I'm a case manager for a couple of our community housing programs at Volunteers of America. Nothing specific led me to public service, but I definitely couldn't see myself doing anything else.
I'm Debbie Hunter-Holland. I'm the community engagement advocate for the Aurora Public Schools. I am in public service because for me, it's the right thing to do to make things better for other people in my community.
Hi, I'm Ellie Leitner. I'm a patient navigator at MCPN Community Health Center, and I've always been interested in public health.
My name is Todd Matuszewicz. I was a glassblower for 15 years. I was an elementary school teacher for 15 years. And I'm embarking on my encore career, which will be public service. And so I'm here to just test the waters. Thanks for having me.
I'm Sophia Matuszewicz. I'm actually not with any organization, but I recently relocated back to Denver, and I'm interested in housing issues, so I just came here to learn.
I'm Hannah Hahn. I work at Aurora Housing Authority, and I think public service is a way to get paid and give back to the community.
I'm Grace Durant, excuse me, also with the Aurora Housing Authority, and someone said this earlier, but I just can't imagine doing anything else in the public service.
My name is Monica Martinez. I'm with the Facts Partnership, and I work in public service because I want to make a difference, and selling widgets just sounds so boring.
Hi, I'm Charlene Escobar. I work for Arapahoe Douglas Works. I've been in public service for practically my whole life. It's a way of, preparing people to get better careers and better wages, being able to afford more housing.
Hi, I'm Katie McKenna. I'm from Habitat for Humanity of Metro Denver, and it's important to me that everyone has a safe and affordable place to live, and that's why I do what I do.
I'm Melissa Toddy. I work for Denver Office of Economic Development, the Housing Division, and I've always had an interest in helping the homeless and just individuals.
I'm Jenna Ebner. I'm a school social worker from Jeffco Public Schools, and I've always been called to give a voice to those who often do not have one, especially those with severe disabilities.
Hey everyone, I'm Stevie Graham with the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And like others, I think just life experience in my own life and my family, and just always knew it's what I wanted to do, so I'm fortunate enough to be able to do it for work.
Jamie Villalobos from the Denver, Colorado Area Project, Regional Director. Kind of, again, just life experience and just all this kind of passion to help those communities that are in need and need that support and advocacy that's out there.
Tracy Smith, Housing and Resources Manager at the Denver, Colorado AIDS Project. And I'm in public service because I saw Ryan White on the Donahue show when I was young, and it made me want to get involved in the health and community and work with folks that are homeless, and having been a realtor in a past incarnation of my career as well. Housing is healthcare.
I'm Sarah Kinter. I'm Vice President of the Gathering Place, and for me, it's empowering people to be able to advocate for themselves.
Jeremy Fink, I'm with Arapahoe County. For me, it's just a way to be involved in the community and give back.
Leanna Escott, Arapahoe County Community Resources, and actually an internship at HUD is what put me in this path. So.
Good afternoon, I'm Stacy Moslett. I'm with the County and City of Denver. I'm the supervisor of the Veteran Services Program. I accidentally fell into public service, to be quite honest. I did a bunch of work with veterans that had traumatic brain injuries and helping them reintegrate into civilian life as well in education, and just kind of haven't turned back since then. So.
I'm Danny Polk. I work for Open Door Ministries. It's a faith-based nonprofit downtown, and I would say my faith is what led me to do this work.
I'm Janie Rosenberry. I work for Open Door Ministries, and I do the transitional employment program there. And I do this work because I feel called to it, and it's the best way I know how to bring restoration and justice to those who are marginalized and oppressed.
I'm Dennis Malone. I'm the Director of Operations for Hope Communities. And I've been doing this for about 48 years now. So I guess it's a form of public service, but it's more housing.
Hi, I'm Brad Winding with Enterprise Community Partners. We're a national affordable housing nonprofit advocate and financer. And I didn't seek out public servant work. I think it seeked me out, but now I'm committed to it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Davis with the City of Aurora. As one of the collaborative partners, I want to thank you all, and as host today for this meeting, thank you guys for coming out. Your participation in this is vital to the success of the findings in this assessment. A little bit of a short notice. Thank you so much for making the time to come and join us. I work for the Community Development Department with the city. We oversee the CDBG and home grants for the city. I graduated from college with a planning degree, so it was my intent to be in public service. But then as working in the planning field, I saw the benefits of the block grant funds and the things that we could do with those. So I kind of took that path, and 18 years later, here I am. So, thanks.
Hi, I'm Polly Kyle. I am an aide to Councilwoman Robin Kniech, an at-large councilwoman in Denver. Public service, I simply just want to help people. So that's why I'm in public service.
Thank you guys so much. We love to start meetings like this, kind of touching base with why are we doing this? You know, why did I get into this field that I did? So the AFH. So the AFH rule was adopted in 2015, and it applies to program participants. So folks that receive federal funds from HUD, and those include CDBG, home, ESG, and HUD-required recipients, as well as public housing authorities. Really the purpose of the rule was to provide these program participants with a framework to analyze their communities from a civil rights lens. The past incarnation of this work was called the analysis of impediments. Some of you may be familiar with that, and it was a fairly loose document that typically sat on a shelf just in case HUD came and did an audit, and folks wanted to be able to say, well, here's our analysis of impediments. The AFH, the Assessment of Fair Housing, really is meant to put a little bit of teeth into the perspective of let's look at our community from a fair housing perspective. What are the fair housing issues that we see? And what does access to opportunity look like for all of our residents? And so it's a little bit broader and really, I think, takes that next step in that our world isn't just the roof over our heads, right? We experience access to opportunity when it comes to our education, when it comes to employment, when it comes to the public services that my city or my community delivers. So it's a bigger perspective. And what's another key difference with the assessment of fair housing is that HUD has provided a significant amount of data and mapping tools that are available online so that communities can use, get a standard start at their assessment of fair housing. But we're really encouraged to look at local knowledge and local data. Really, the assessment of fair housing is data-driven. It is meant to help communities take a look at their world and say, you know, we really think that this aspect of our community is experienced differently by people of color, for example, or by our residents with disabilities, and what can we as a community do to mitigate that? And it really looks at segregation, access to opportunity, disproportionate housing needs from the civil rights perspective. And it's really meant to be incorporated into each recipient's consolidated plan, which determines how they will expend their CDBG funds, or for your PHA, into your PHA plan. So unlike the AI, this is not meant to sit on a shelf. It's really meant to lead to goals and strategies that the participating partners commit to implementing. And really, it's about meaningful action. It's about moving the needle.
And HUD's very understanding about where different communities are, you know, what a different community might be prepared to do, might look different place to place. But it really is about how can we actually affirmatively further fair housing in the spirit of the Civil Rights Act. And so the AFH is the framework for that. So this content is the assessment tool. So we are provided with a structure from HUD that the jurisdictions that we will complete. And its elements really are an executive summary, a summary of community participation, an assessment of past goals and actions. So what have the jurisdictions done in the past to affirmatively further fair housing? An analysis of fair housing issues, a summary of current fair housing outreach capacity and resources, and then the goals and priorities. Where I think your interest will likely lie is in the fair housing analysis. And the fair housing analysis looks at a demographic summary of both the participating jurisdictions as well as the region in which we operate. We look at segregation and integration and what's the nature of places in our community. Or do we have neighborhoods that are segregated neighborhoods as a direct result of past acts of discrimination? And are those neighborhoods rich cultural enclaves, or are those neighborhoods that have been disinvested in, that have not had true opportunity woven into their fabric? So we look at that. We look at what HUD has termed racially or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. And so those are places where in an urban area like ours, the non-white population is greater than 50% in a census tract, and the poverty rate is 40% or higher. So HUD and the social science research have really determined that when you have poverty concentrations at or above 40%, that's really when you see a lot of the negative externalities that are associated with super high poverty. And so they really want the jurisdictions to say, do we have any of those neighborhoods in our communities? If so, what's their story? And what's going on there? What does access to opportunity look like in those places? We will do an analysis of disparities in access to opportunity, again looking at education, employment, transportation, access to low poverty neighborhoods, and and disproportionate housing needs. So disproportionate housing needs, some of you who work in the consolidated plan world might be familiar with that kind of language. That might be you have households that are cost burdened, where they're paying 30% or more of their household income toward their housing costs. Or you might have households who are living in substandard housing, or households who are living in overcrowded housing. Those are all examples of disproportionate housing needs. And unlike other studies that primarily look at those characteristics from an income basis, you know, what's the story with low-income households? Are they more likely to be cost-burdened, et cetera? The AFH looks at those issues from a fair housing perspective. So asking the question, of those who are cost-burdened, are members of a certain protected class more likely to be cost-burdened? Are they disparately impacted? So really taking that lens through the perspective of the protected classes that are covered by the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and by Colorado and our local rules. There's a publicly supported housing analysis, and there we are looking at both what's going on inside the walls of publicly supported housing as well as outside the walls. So examples of types of analyses as they relate to the publicly supported housing include looking at where is our publicly supported housing located? Is it located in areas of opportunity, or is it concentrated in high poverty neighborhoods? And what choices have we made over the decades that lead to where our publicly supported housing is sited? We also look inside the walls and try to get a sense of are the types of residents served by public housing representative of the types of residents who qualify to benefit for that? Or are we seeing segregation even within our public housing? Or are we seeing that some populations that could qualify are not being served? So taking a look at those issues. And then within the disability and access analysis, this is a chapter as a standalone that is dedicated to looking at fair housing issues and access to opportunity, strictly through the lens of residents with disabilities. And that's disabilities of all types, whether that is intellectual, physical, developmental, and so forth. And really, that's a place where your local data and local knowledge might be particularly helpful because there's very little nationally available data on residents with disabilities, as opposed to the depth of information that we have for some other public protected classes. All of this analysis leads us into looking at what are the fair housing issues in Denver, Aurora, Broomfield, Boulder County. What's in common among those places? What do we see just happening in one or more of the participating jurisdictions? And then we look at, well, what are the factors that create that? So if we see segregation in a certain neighborhood, we have to ask, well, what are the factors that contributed to that? Sometimes the answer might be, you can see this as direct result of redlining practices in the 1920s and 30s. You can just sometimes overlay that map exactly. That's certainly how it looks in the city of Austin, for example. It may be that, well, you know, we really see this concentration of this type of housing here because there used to be a factory there in the 1950s, it closed, and nobody's invested in this community ever since. Or it might be that this is a place of choice, you know, that this is where residents of this community want to live and continue to live. And, you know, we look at, well, then what are the assets? And, you know, are there resources that the governments haven't been investing in those neighborhoods and so forth? So really trying to get a hard at, you know, hey, for these disproportionate housing needs, what's really causing that? With the goal being, let's prioritize these contributing factors. Which are the ones that we can actually move the needle on and develop goals and priorities that will result in increased opportunities to affirmatively further fair housing choice in the region. So that's really kind of how it weaves together. And then these goals and priorities are what the jurisdictions will be incorporating into other planning efforts so that it lives and is woven throughout. So this website here, which is egis.hud.gov/A, F as in Frank, H, T as in Tony, is the data and mapping tool for the assessment of fair housing. It is open to everyone. So you can look at the same base information that we will be looking at. There are links to that website on the study website, and we've got the study website at the bottom of your agenda. But so from there, if you would like, you can look at the different types of maps and tables that are provided for the jurisdictions. You can see the regional data. And you can take a look at yourself. You know, where are people with limited English proficiency living in the region? What languages are clustered together? You can answer those questions and look at that in these maps. We will be doing all of that. We will be posting PDFs of the maps on the project website. But in case you're curious, you can go take a look yourself. The key point here is that local data and local knowledge is critical. What we are able to access from HUD is data that they have that's available in every single census tract in the country. So that means that they've had to, you know, take a pretty thin slice in some areas. For example, when we look at environmental health, the measure that HUD has been able to provide relates to air quality. There are certainly other environmental issues that impact neighborhoods that your local data, your local knowledge can help us fill in. Community engagement is a big deal in the assessment of fair housing. The requirements on this slide are the requirements that are found in the rule. So each one of the participating partners needs to update their citizen participation plan to incorporate the assessment of fair housing. Again, as another example of how this isn't just a standalone, this is getting it integrated into other planning processes. They must make the AFH data available to the community, provide opportunities for meaningful participation. Again, at the heart, this is not about checking a box and saying X hundred, X thousand people did something with the AFH. We really want to hear their stories and experiences and weave it into the document. We need to provide opportunities for the public to be involved in setting the goals and priorities. We need to ask who's missing from the process and seek them out. I'm sure just from hearing the introductions today, like, oh, this group should have been here today, that group should have been here today. So really our who's missing conversation starts today. And again, we really need to weave the information that we hear from the AFH throughout the document. And in helping with the spirit of involving the community and developing the goals and priorities, we need to have at least one public hearing before the draft is ever released. And it's been our practice as we've been developing these studies to really orient that towards involving the community in vetting the goals and strategies and vetting the key findings. And then there's a minimum 30-day public comment period. We actually will hold a 45-day public comment period because some of the participating partners are public housing authorities. And so that's in keeping with their 45-day public comment periods. Just in terms of clarifying things, for the purposes of the AFH community engagement process, which I'll be talking about in a little more depth, we really consider a resident to be any person living in Denver-Aurora-Boulder County or Broomfield County. So when I talk resident, I'm thinking about them. That isn't to say that other people who live in the region aren't welcome to participate, because hopefully they will if there's space for them, but our focus is on our participating partners. Stakeholders really are you all, and you typically fall into one of a few categories. An advocate, advocating on behalf of a particular protected class, or a particular housing, employment, opportunity-related issue, a subject matter expert, an elected official or elected official staff, members of boards or commissions, and leadership of organizations that do work with members of protected classes. So when we talk stakeholders, we're not trying to say that residents aren't stakeholders in this thing, because we are, but really just as a way of differentiating between those who have more expertise or who can speak for a group than those of us who just, as a resident, I can speak about my own experiences. So the community engagement plan for the assessment of fair housing includes 5 focus groups with stakeholders. These are going to be organized around subject matter expertise. So there will be a group related to transportation, one related to homelessness, one related to disability, one related to education, thank you, and one related to employment. And then we'll have 6 community meetings throughout the region. Resident focus groups, so we'll have 3 with residents with disabilities, 1 with African immigrants, refugees, 1 with Asian Pacific immigrants and refugees, and 1 with Hispanic residents. Likely this will be actually a Spanish-speaking focus group. We have a resident survey. Yes, ma'am.
What about for Latinos who are not native Spanish speakers?
There will be many, many other ways to participate. And I'll elaborate on that in just a minute. Thank you, that's a great question. So we also have a community survey, and it's available in English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Russian, Tagalog, Amharic, and Vietnamese. So the reason we chose those languages are that we looked at the language access plans of the participating jurisdictions. We looked at limited English proficiency populations in the region, and those were the languages that really floated to the top for the broad access. We will also have what we call pop-up engagement, which really are events and activities where instead of asking residents to come to us, we go to where they are. And so we've got some locations in mind for that I'll describe in a little more detail. Denver has decided to do some deep dive neighborhood conversations in West Denver and in the Cole neighborhoods. And then we'll have a presentation at a public hearing before the goals go out. This graphic kind of gives you a sense of the populations that we're focused on. And the reason why we chose those focus group populations for the focus groups are because in our experience, these are often the hardest to reach by the other methods that we've designed. However, at all of our pop-up engagement activities, where we're really looking to reach all Hispanic residents, refugees, people on the basis of religion, LGBT, people of color, homeless, DHA residents, residents of the other public housing authorities, families with kids, will be out in the community. And so we've got some locations. Go ahead.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So focus groups, at least in my mind, my experience in research, it is more focused and intentional, longer, in-depth activity to engage these folks participating, rather a part of the engagement activity sounds, it's like it's brief, not as in-depth, and so how are those voices going to be integrated and actually have, unless they're there and really want to stay there forever, talking with you guys, how are you really going to get their voice?
Great question. And so I think in two ways, three actually. So the first is the resident survey that's available to absolutely everybody is very in-depth, and it is specifically designed to address the key elements of the assessment of fair housing that we need to look at. We also have the community meetings that are held 6 throughout the region. And then in Denver in particular, we have community conversations in Cole and in West Denver. And those are like a focus group, but a larger scale, but still an in-depth conversation. So between those, given the resources that we have available for the AFH, we really believe that gives us the coverage we need for those stories. And we also have what we call community engagement in a box. And I've got starter packets for you all to pick up if you're interested. And the opportunity there is for you to take the tools that have been developed for the study and to use those in your own way and to incorporate them back. So it includes samples of the surveys, samples of the flyers that are used to promote the survey, and community conversation guides. So the same guide that we use for the focus groups, we encourage you all, when it's appropriate, to include those types of questions in your interactions and then send the information back to us so it can be woven in. So for example, in the AFH we just did in the Bay Area, some of the advocates we work with had relationships with residents of a mobile home park. And while we didn't have the budget to go in and do those groups, they were able to take our tools, facilitate a conversation, and then report the information back so that it's woven in. So it's really been designed with kind of balancing what our available resources are and given the coverage there. But at the end of the meeting, we'd encourage anyone who's interested to take a packet. We've got, I think, 40 of them here, so you have several of you from the same organization if you want to just take one. Inside is our contact information that's also on the agenda. So if you need or would like electronic copies or more copies, we are really happy to have you have those, because the more that we can incorporate, the better. And you all, with your clients, with your consumers, with the residents you advocate for, are best positioned to help facilitate their participation in the work that we do. And so, in terms of time frame, the AFH itself will actually be submitted in the first week of April. So we are doing the resident surveys really formally kicking off November 1st, and it'll run through the month of November. It's online and available today, but we really want to bring you all in at the very, very beginning of the process. So this is truly the launch of the study. The resident focus groups will happen in October, November, December. November and December is when we'll really be doing the on-the-ground engagement at the pop-up sites. Neighborhood conversations will be in December. We're setting the dates for those in the next week or so. And then community meetings will really happen in January, February, and March, because we want to be able to take to those meetings the preliminary findings from the prior events, so that we could really say, hey, we saw in the resident survey that 35% of Black families who participated have had to move in the last 5 years because of housing costs. You know, is that your experience? Are these the same reasons that you've experienced? What's the story? Do you see yourself in the findings here? And then we'll have public hearings again in March prior to the release of the guide. And then we'll have sort of the couple of bigger events that are more regional, you know, as an opportunity for folks to participate. We also are happy to share with you tools, and I'll send these out to the RSVP list. I've got templates for encouraging folks to participate in the survey online, again with links to all of the surveys and all of the languages, and the folders are by Meji that if you're interested you can pick up at the end of the session. And so what's in those are 10 resident surveys in English and Spanish, flyers for all of the other languages, and a discussion guide, which is the same focus group guide that we use. And again, my contact information is on the surveys, it's on the agenda, so we really want to be able to put tools into your hands so that the participation can be as expansive as possible and as meaningful as possible. This is it's really important, and we need residents' experiences and stories to flesh out what we see in the data. And so we're hoping for your involvement in that, and anything that we can do to facilitate that, let us know. Another aspect of the study that HUD emphasizes is the importance of local knowledge and local data. And a great example of that might be, you look at the access to proficient schools data and look at the neighborhood you work in and say, well, gosh, that school has a really low proficient school rating according to this HUD data, but it's this fantastic place, it's the center of the neighborhood, it's the center of the community, it has all of these assets. That's a real example of how local knowledge can flesh out what we're seeing kind of behind the data. What's the story there? Some of you may have done some studies or surveys with the populations you serve or that you advocate for. For example, some of you who maybe work with homeless, maybe you've done some work that helps you identify, gosh, X% of the population we serve have a disability. You know, that's important information for us to weave into the section as it relates to disability. Because being homeless is not a protected class. So where those population voices can be integrated is throughout the rest of the analysis. Vanessa?
I have tons of questions for you. This is
That's
really
okay.
fascinating. You say turnover, are you talking about school turnovers like as in reform policies and like school closures? Or are you talking about student mobility as in a student transferring schools?
Yep, here in this example, you know, oftentimes, particularly in a housing market like the one that we have, our vulnerable families, whether it's because of eviction or needing to move because hours have been cut, you know, somehow the household's income has gone down, oftentimes that means they're moving to affordability, and that generally means maybe out of their kid's school district or out of the school neighborhood or beyond the choice boundaries. So trying to understand the impact of that dynamic, and these are really just examples of local data that might be important. Some of you may work regarding transportation access. So you may have access to information about how residents of certain neighborhoods are currently served by available public transit, but may experience limitations related to hours of operation, day of week of service, or the length of time it takes to get from the neighborhood to a nearby employment center, for example. So really, we're looking for any of that flavor that you're able to share with us. We'll get a lot of that information in the subject matter expert focus groups, but again, if you're sort of like, wow, in the last 2 years, we've looked at, you know, what's the situation for people with AIDS looking for housing, and how has that changed in the last 10 years? You know, that's information that we can incorporate into the study itself. So another piece where, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a lot of information relates to environmental health challenges in neighborhoods. So, you know, if you've done work in a neighborhood with issues related to other kind of environmental factors, whether that's, you know, industrial noise or industrial pollution or kind of anything else, lead paint, etc., that can help inform that element, wonderful. Generally speaking, give us what you've got, we'll find a way to incorporate it. Yes?
I was trying to wait until you got through because you're kind of moving through. So are we at a place for questions?
Sure. Actually, this is a great spot for questions because this is the last of the kind of what's the AFH, what are we going to do? And then I've got a discussion question that I'd like to get all of you some feedback on to help the conversation get started. But if any of you have methodological questions, we can start with that. Go ahead, Ms. Haynes.
Thank you. I have several questions, short answers. First, what is your goal for this meeting? What do you want from us?
Exactly.
So, and then I'll go to the next one. So,
perfect. So the goal, twofold. First is to let you know that this is happening. Second is to invite you into the process, to get you thinking about the process, and ideally, to take one of the community engagement in a box packages and, you know, send it out to your folks.
okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. Is this slideshow available to us?
I can make it available, absolutely.
Great. It's easier than taking notes. And then
We'll post it up on the project website.
Two structural questions, since you asked the general process questions. One comes back to the acknowledgement that focus groups are not what you have described. But in your shaded timeline, you put in stakeholder focus groups. How will you be determining who out of that group of 6 categories will actually be in a focus group? And are those traditional focus groups, or are they non-focus groups the way you've described?
Perfect. So, 2 things. So for the stakeholder focus groups that are really looking for subject matter experts, traditional focus group will be probably over lunch or in the morning or afternoon during the workday, since we're expecting the professional community to come. They'll last about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And we are currently working with participating jurisdictions to identify local experts who should be a part of that. So again, if any of you have thoughts on, if you really want to get the skinny on access to transportation in the region, so-and-so ought to be in the room, please let us know. We're certainly sourcing it as much as we can and using our own knowledge since we live and work here, but again, putting that out there. The second piece is for the resident focus groups, the way that those work are they are hosted by a host organization, and because we're in the process of reaching out to those organizations, I don't want to broadcast them, but typically what that looks like is we have a partner, maybe a Center for Independent Living, who's going to host for us. They will recruit residents to come at a time of their convenience and so forth, and we'll sit down and talk with them for about an hour and a half. And the discussion there really is about what's your experience living and finding a place to live in the region, and what's your experience with accessing the resources here. And so those are for those focus groups. And then the other engagement activities typically take a variety of formats. Some that we are hoping to secure are more of a meeting after church, where we bring in coffee and donuts and sit down and have conversations with people where, you know, they can stay and give their input for 15 minutes or for an hour and a half, really depending on what's most suitable for them. Or where we're going door to door at businesses, or where we are going to in a larger gathering place. We're hoping to secure actually some time at a day labor center. We're in talks with a day shelter to get some time there as well. And we design our activities based on who the audience is and what it is that we're hoping to get at. Generally speaking, it's really about stories. It's really about what's your experience, what's your housing story, what's your access to opportunity story. Hey, we're hearing this about people like you or about people in this neighborhood. Is that true? You know, what do we need to hear that we don't know? And then the end goal really is to say, if we identify, for example, that people with disabilities are disparately impacted by the way Access-a-Ride operates. For example, the hours of operation or the sign-up process, for example. You know, we would be writing a goal around that and working with the partners to determine it. We may find that that there's a need for testing. We may hear that certain types of people are experiencing housing discrimination by private landlords or small mom and pop landlords. And that might signal to us, you know, do these guys even know what their obligations are under the Fair Housing Act? And what kind of measures can be taken to mitigate that? But at the end of the day, it really is about, for this region, how can we increase housing choice and access to opportunity? And it's really about moving the needle there.
Let me finish my last question. First, let me come back and say that I have some suggestions for who you can talk to in a couple of communities, and I'll make sure that I communicate that to you.
Perfect.
My last question is, what magic potion do you have that you're going to get the responses that you want from a combination of surveys that are written and this very loose focus group plan that you have? The only demonstrated way of accurate engagement on a community level is at the door, and I don't see any canvas or one-on-one in real time.
Yep. So I'll give you an example, which is we just did a study like this in San Mateo County, California, which is just on the border due south of San Francisco. And we had over 4,000 respondents and folks engage in our different activities. And of those, half were people of color, about a third were people who have limited English proficiency, about a third were people with disabilities. And so our efforts are intentional in trying to find, what's the best way to reach community XYZ. But we also know I am not the best person to have a certain connection with some populations. So we reach out to people like yourselves who are the experts, who have access to the people who are taking ESL classes at the Asian Pacific Center, or who are the guys who are part of Barbershop Talk Live. Can we get in the door with them to sit down and have a conversation? Can we get in at Queen of Peace Church after Mass? So trying to go where people are and inviting them to participate in an intentional way. Really, that's what we can do. We certainly build our scopes and our plans on our own experience, having completely unsuccessful engagement processes where we've had nobody show up. That's actually why we've moved our effort and intention away from, we're having a public meeting, everyone come out. That's not that effective. So we've really spent the last 5 years in particular trying to develop techniques that are more effective, where we're actually going to residents where they gather, whether that's church, libraries, in front of the grocery store, in front of the carnicieras, at the barber shop, at the hair braiding place. That's where we will be going and promoting the surveys, and then relying on you all. Let me get him over here.
What do you guys hope to do with the results of the survey? So you find out there's, all these dozens of impediments to fair housing in the Denver metro area. You put out this report. I mean, is it thought that like HUD is going to follow up on these? The Denver Metro Fair Housing Council? What action steps do you see coming from this information?
So the participating partners are required to take action on the goals that are developed for the study. So our process is that, we work with the jurisdictions, we do the analysis, we incorporate, so throughout the document, when you read it, because it's going to be awesome, you'll see, we found in the survey that X% of residents experience this, and it's borne out in this eviction data that we gathered from this resource. So it's incorporated. And then we work with the jurisdictions and participating partners to develop actionable, measurable, and specific goals and strategies to mitigate some of the contributing factors that we found. This is supposed to be realistic. The partners aren't going to solve a problem that took 200 years to create, for example, or that took 70 years and evolved over time. But they can be ambitious, and they can, set forth goals. And some of those goals will involve them partnering with others, whether that is Metro Denver Fair Housing Center and asking, funding them to do certain activities, or if it's partnering with RTD to increase access, transportation access to a certain neighborhood, or create connections to employment centers. Those are the types of goals that they can look at. And if you guys want examples of past AFHs, feel free to email me and I can send you links to several of those that are done. HUD will be holding the jurisdictions accountable, but since this is a new rule, I can't say, here's how they enforced it last year. Unlike the analysis of impediments, every AFH is signed off on by HUD. So it's submitted, HUD has to respond to it within, I believe, 60 days. And we've done technical assistance for a couple of jurisdictions that have submitted AFHs and had them passed back by HUD. And typically where HUD has been passing back AFHs is really related to the goals, whether they're not specific enough, whether they're not directly linked to a contributing factor that was identified, whether HUD questioned. Really, it comes down to about the goals. And then moving forward, the expectation is that they'll be integrated in consolidated plans. So with the jurisdictions, that's where HUD has leverage, is in the funding that they distribute. But a lot of communities have taken it further than what's happening with HUD. In the San Mateo County, they have an affordable housing fund. They really have tied their AFH goals to how they will be using that affordable housing fund. So there are opportunities for each of the jurisdictions to integrate them as they'd like. Other questions? Yes?
Do you think some of those actions might include policy changes or additional protected classes?
I really couldn't speculate since we haven't done the work, but I think that the perspective is, go where the research finds. And so, I think what's been effective in other jurisdictions is that the AFH is also a really useful tool for the advocacy community. So legal aid and the other organization just had an opinion piece in one of the Bay Area newspapers about the AFH and their thoughts on how the findings suggest the need for particular policy changes in the area. So, the jurisdictions will decide, what's reasonable and actionable for them and what they can do, and then it's, a public document, and if there are findings from it that can inform the work that you all do, that's a win. Anything that's affirmatively furthering fair housing in the region is in keeping with the spirit of the AFH. Yes, Nick?
With reaching out to kind of underserved communities, relationship is super important. And we had been filling out contacts on a Google Doc, and what I noticed is there wasn't a category for who gave you those. And so I really think it would be incredibly important, because otherwise you're just a call or an email that's another blah blah. And I think if you were to say, so-and-so sent you, and because they have trust for that person, then they might be willing to talk to you more.
That's perfect, so I'll make sure we add that in.
Yeah, I think context is critical. And second of all, the great majority of issues is price related and what we're seeing. And the HUD issues are federal issues, of which we never get more money and we're always dealing with less. So what responsibility does HUD have? Yes, it's great, and I hear you saying we're going to hold those jurisdictions accountable, but a great majority of the issues are, not all, but some are we don't have enough and we're always at less. So what part of responsibility does HUD take in looking at that and saying, and that comes from Congress, and I know it's a lot bigger issue, but I think if HUD's going to make jurisdictions go through all of this, they also have to carry their part in reform in these findings. So is that even a thought or?
So obviously I don't work for HUD, so I can't speak for HUD. What I will say is that in our experience and being a part of the training team, for example, we've been able to interact with people from the FHEO office in DC, and I guess I would say that they get it. They get that this is a big deal, but they also say this has been on the books since 1965, and communities have an obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. And so they understand that it's a lot of work. They've really created a cool tool. I mean, the data and mapping tool is a huge help. And so, I think that everything you brought up is incredibly valid. It was a definite theme in the public comment about the regulation itself. And you're right. Beyond that, I really can't say, other than the hope, I think, is that by integrating the AFH into the consolidated plan, for example, that you have that additional layer of commitment, both from the jurisdiction as well as from the HUD region and reviewers. Are you making progress on these goals? Do I see the spirit of your AFH goals reflected in how you're choosing to spend your CDBG? And that's kind of about my only guesstimate thoughts on those. Yes?
Two questions. Are you going to look at the correlation between mass development and displacement in low-income communities of color? Are you going to look at the negative effects of gentrification in those communities, which there are a lot in Denver? And are the policy recommendations, well, I know a few people mentioned policy recommendations. I do believe all politics is local, and a lot can be done at the municipal level. And a lot of housing barriers can be addressed through the local government. Will those, I guess, be included? I would like to see Boulder, Aurora, Broomfield and Denver take on some legislation that would actually address those housing barriers?
Sure. So as to issues related to displacement in particular, there are a number of questions within the resident survey that are specifically tied to displacement. The first is looking at have you had to move in the past 5 years when you didn't want to move, which I think is a pretty good description of I've been displaced, and looking at the factors behind that. And when we've asked that question in the past, they range from personal reasons, which usually means I had to move because my relationship ended and I'm unhappy that I had to move. That's just life. But we've also seen people having to move because, you know, the landlord wanted to move back in, the landlord wanted to move his now adult kid into the unit, the landlord raised the rent higher than I can afford. So, you know, that's one measure where we can get, you know, a sizable number of responses to help us characterize that, because there really isn't a specific source of data that helps us look at that. We also take a timeline view, so looking at where people lived in 1990, 2000, 2010, and today. And that's a measure of looking at, you know, demographically, how have people shifted in the region? Particularly if you think about the Metro Denver area, you know, since pretty much the mid-90s, we've seen a resurgence in the city and county of Denver, where, you know, kind of implementing the opposite of what we experienced in the 80s in particular, right? So you've seen that demographic change, which has led to shifts. Plus, we've had all of the population growth, right? And where are those people going? And prices go up, and then people drive to affordability. That happens, right? So looking at measuring it from the experience side, and then again, because it's a fair housing study, having to ask, are members of protected classes disparately impacted? You know, is displacement because the rent went up an everybody problem or an income problem? Or are we seeing that more vulnerable populations, members of protected classes, are disparately represented in the populations that are being displaced? So that's kind of that element of that. And then, you know, when you look at gentrification, that's a lot of those same types of things. We're looking at where there's analyses that also look at where are we making economic development investments, where are we making infrastructure investments, what kinds of investments are we making, and you might relate to an example that we heard in East Austin, which is a historically black neighborhood in Austin. And when we had a pop-up engagement event at a senior center there, they said to us, well, I knew it was time for me to move when they put in the bike lanes, because that meant that they didn't want people dog carts, right? And so again, but looking at that, and then from those same neighborhoods, are your street lights working? Are your sidewalks in good shape? You know, do you have that kind of infrastructure? Are you a community that our cities have invested in or not? And looking at those implications. But for this study, everything has to go through that fair housing lens. You know, not having enough money isn't a fair housing issue unless there's that additional disparate impact linkage. So there's those pieces of that.
I want to maybe echo the last three comments that have been made and encourage that if the ultimate goal here is that we end up trying to just make sure that HUD accepts the document, that we will have missed a tremendous opportunity to affect the policy changes that we've been discussing, especially given the uncertainty that exists throughout HUD. I know that some of the staff at FAO get it, but they don't have a boss, I don't think, right now, right? So I mean, it's...
They don't need a boss.
Yeah, maybe. But the point being that I guess I want to challenge, you know, you, Jen, and BBC, and everybody in this room to make sure that in every jurisdiction the recommendations extend beyond how do we rearrange the way that we deploy HUD and home and CDBG funds and get to how do we change land uses, how do we impact policies that protect renters, warranty of habitability, background checks, whatever the case may be. Get to those real practical things that, yeah, it may be scary, the fact that, you know, HUD might be holding us accountable, but it uses as a tool to hold ourselves accountable to do these things and kind of do what we can with local governments to do it. So I know it's scary to do, and jurisdictions tend to kind of pull back and not put themselves out there in these processes, given all of the questions at HUD, but how do we kind of get beyond that fear and jump in this together now that there's 10 jurisdictions involved?
That's great, and I think that one of the ways that we've seen that play out is that, you know, you do the analysis, you get as much of that input as possible, create the goals and strategies, and then these are the jurisdiction's goals and strategies, right? They're not the BBC goals and strategies, they're the jurisdictions. But what we've seen be very effective in other communities is folks like you who have that intimate knowledge of the populations you work with and the challenges that they have and what their fair housing issues are, raising those and making sure that they're accurately represented, encouraging you to be a part of the process all the way along. That's why we have this meeting now before anything's even pinned down so that we can begin to have those conversations. Because, staff also needs to be able to go back to City Council and say, this isn't Meg's idea. This came from the residents of this neighborhood from the city of Aurora. That's what's most important, and certainly when you think about the policy influences, having that leg to stand on that is this data-driven process that is based on successful participation by staff or by our residents, that helps staff have that conversation. And it also helps us be an ongoing conversation. What are the wins today and the eye on in a year or in 2 years, and recognizing, where jurisdiction is. We've done work in other parts of Texas that have been, a small, very conservative suburb outside of Dallas. And, they were very afraid of the AFH, and they had heard that this is government coming in to tell us what to do with our zoning code and with our community. And, when we talk about people's homes, it's a real fear. I get it. I don't want somebody to tell me what to do with my home. But once we were able to sit down with them and talk about, this is about, for example, your 10 veterans who came home last month with disabilities, can they access, the community? Can they get into their house? What are their options? And help change the perspective that this civil rights lens is about opportunity. And what can we do to advance that forward? But again, for your staff, city staff, they need to know that this is data-driven, based in facts, and have confidence in the policies that are advocated. But you all have a very important part to play, and as advocates, you have groups and organizations and issues that you advocate for. You've got basically your job, we've got ours, and hopefully the goal is to really have this be a very meaningful document at the end of the day that increases access to opportunity for the state. Well, so what we'd really like to do with the last half hour or so of our time is get your sense from where you are today about what you think are the biggest fair housing issues or housing issues in general that you really hope we're attuned to and that you want us to take a look at. Kelly, you're from corrections, right? Starting off, what do you think is the biggest housing-related challenge or fair housing issue that the folks that you work with experience?
I think affordability, but also being discriminated against because of their conditions. I think with the housing here in Denver, there's so many people who are looking to move here, and landlords or apartment communities easy about who they take, and so that leaves people with felonies in a tough spot.
So felonies, how about background checks, credit checks, are those also issues? Anything you want to elaborate on in the back with glasses?
Oh.
Sorry, you nodded.
Yeah.
You caught my attention,
Yeah.
you nodded.
I'm just nodding in agreement, but yeah, I would say background checks, credit checks are huge. Someone may not have a background, but if they are economically disadvantaged, they're never going to pass the credit check. And then I would also say just availability. Availability. There's just not a whole lot of housing units that will accept people who have backgrounds and low credit.
Hi, I missed the beginning, but I'm Connie. I'm from the International Rescue Committee. We're a nonprofit resettlement agency, and I totally, it's a big issue with credit score, history, not having a social security number, not having income. Yeah.
And you feel like that disparately impacts members of protected classes? So based on color, national origin, language, yes, not just an income-related issue? Okay.
Can you add the application fees to it?
And could you elaborate on the application fees issue?
Exorbitant fees.
fees charged just to put in your application, even if you have no chance of getting it, if the landlords know that, then it's going to make this.
There's no state legislation in Colorado to protect renters about, on the scope of background checks, credit checks, and in regards to the application fees, the bill died last year on trying to limit the amount and then also the number of people you could charge. The legislature.
Please,
To tag on that, there also isn't any way for people to have any comfort that they're giving somebody that they don't know access to their vital information. And this is, we had an example of this in one neighborhood I was working in, where the person who wasn't even the landlord put it out and just stole everyone's identity who applied to rent.
So actual bad actors on that, in addition
Yes.
to,
Yes,
these are red
in
thresholds.
addition to red tape and varying thresholds and.
So working in veteran services, we serve a lot of individuals that have service-connected disabilities, so very fixed income, and I know income is a problem, but connected directly to their disability with conviction history and those things. If they even get approved for a unit, a property manager or landlord can charge double, triple deposit, which is just completely unrealistic for somebody on a limited income. And unfortunately, in our community, the availability for funds to assist these individuals is dwindling by the month. So that's a huge issue for us.
For those double, triple deposits, do you think those are being charged to every new tenant, or are they reserved just
So
for
there'll be like
certain
a
tenants?
1-month deposit if you pass the criminal history and the credit check, and then the more conviction history or the lower your credit score, the more and more they're going to increase the past evictions. They're going to increase that deposit amount. Or if you have a past eviction, if they're going to accept you, they'll make you set up an additional payment plan with the eviction that you already have to pay back this $3,000 on top of the $3,000 deposit they're going to charge you just to put your foot in the door.
The other thing about that is that when you leave,
you don't get it back.
Deposit is subjective. That there also needs to potentially be a third party that goes in when you take possession.
Absolutely.
Records the way the house is, the condition of the home, and then a third party again comes in to say, because they take those thousands of dollars and say, oops, but you broke this.
Yeah.
Right. Which
I worked specifically with a nonprofit that provided deposit and rental assistance to homeless veterans, and I remember in the 2 years I worked there seeing 2 deposits come back.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's after millions spent.
So, yeah, it's a profit margin, and that needs to be taken out of the equation just on face value.
There's got to be limits.
So about 4 or 5 years ago, when we did some engagement around the fair